Welcome to Inside Philadelphia City Council. I'm your host, Al Butler. Today we are joined by Councilman Johnson. Welcome, Councilman.
Thanks for having me, Al.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. Now, you've been in the political scene for a while, but you're someone who's dealt with Philadelphia in a number of different ways. One of the biggest things on your mind right now, and has been throughout your history, has been dealing with the guns and violence in the city of Philadelphia. Before we walk back a little bit, talk to us about what you think about the state of violence in the city of Philadelphia right now.
Well, right now, primarily the number one killer of African-American young men is homicide through gun violence. And so it's an issue that I believe that we should be aggressively addressing, providing different alternatives to young men standing on the corner, young men selling drugs, making sure that we also make sure that ex-offenders who are coming home back into our communities have an opportunity to get gainful employment so they don't get involved in the issues of gun violence that has been taking place throughout the city of Philadelphia.
Now, you've been dealing with this for a while, even have some personal issues that have come up in your past, so it's affected you directly. Talk to us a little bit about how you ended up here in your path, because you've been hands-on, you've been in the community dealing with this problem for a long time. So talk to us a little bit about when you first figured out that you wanted to do something.
Yes, in 1998, a cousin of mine was murdered in the streets of South Philadelphia over a petty argument. And as opposed to me getting involved in the retaliation that took place as a result of my cousin being murdered, that weekend I organized the first Peace Not Guns rally and prayer vigil. It's when I organized community leaders from across the city of Philadelphia, as well as the residents of my neighborhood, to come out and organize around having a community of peace and not guns. And so since 1998, I've always focused on doing workshops on conflict resolution, anger management, and anti-street and gun education.
Now talk to us a little bit about the anger management piece, because it seems to me that that's something that a lot of these violent acts that we're hearing about on the news, whether they end in someone's death or some kind of violent attack, seem to be stemming from arguments and brief encounters where it doesn't seem like it should end in the taking of someone's life.
Yeah, well, if you look at statistics by the Philadelphia Police Department, probably about 70% of the gun-related incidents are based upon petty arguments. And that's why it's always tough to narrow down on why a conflict arises out of an actual argument and actually resolves in a homicide. And so we focus on helping young men express themselves in a positive manner in terms of their anger and also how they address conflict in a peaceful manner.
How have you seen the difference in young men who have gotten the opportunity to talk to folks and deal with their anger management issues? What have you seen as a difference from before and after?
Well, for the most part, you want to give a young man an opportunity to look at the consequences of their actions, but also set up a level of support system. And so when they have an opportunity to pick something positive versus something negative, that also plays into the role of them making just smart, positive choices when it comes down to making sure they don't get involved in gun violence. And so if I have a job, I'm going to be more prone to not want to get involved in something negative because I have a job and I want to keep my job. And so we always try to show young people the consequences of their actions and really focus on making sure that they have the resources and ability to go on and do positive things as opposed to things that are negative.
Speaking of employment, when you look at the statistics, not only in Philadelphia but across the country, particularly with the group that we're talking about being impacted by homicide rates, the unemployment rate for African-American teenagers and young men is in the high double digits still, right now in the 17, 18% range. How important is it to get jobs to those communities to help curb the violence? And then also, what are some of the things that we can do to make sure those jobs are available?
Well, it's extremely important. Statistics shows that if you have a young man who's gainfully employed, they're less likely to get involved in a life of crime and violence. If you provide a young man the opportunity and the means to take care of his family, he's going to be less likely to get involved in a life of crime and violence. And so as an elected official, and also as an African-American young male, I advocate strongly to make sure that, one, we have programs that are put in place that help young men with soft skills such as resume writing, cover letters. I have a staff member that's on my staff that's solely focused on helping young men and anybody that comes to my office to get gainful employment, but also making sure that juveniles and adults, when they're arrested and they do time, when they come back to society, they also have an opportunity to become gainfully employed. And I think that will go a long way toward addressing the issue of crime and violence in the city of Philadelphia, making sure that people have an opportunity to live the American dream.
Now, you've done this from the grassroots level,
Yes.
the state level, and now the city level.
Yes.
Talk to me about how you've had the ability to have different impacts from those places and how they
Yes.
work together to make sure that you can do that, because it seems at different times the state is less cooperative or the city
Yes.
is less cooperative, and grassroots
Yes.
folks are always struggling to get the resources that they need.
Yes.
Talk to us about how that synergy works.
Well, first and foremost, when I served in the State House, I've always advocated for common sense gun laws, but more importantly, the resources to make sure that a young person doesn't have to pick up a gun in the first place. So if that's making sure more resources go to our after-school programs, if that's making sure that more resources go to our drug and alcohol programs, if that's making sure that more resources go to our job training and employment programs throughout the city of Philadelphia, then that's what I always put on the priority as a part of me advocating for resources to make sure that young people don't have to pick up a gun in the first place. But also on the city level, we do grassroots outreach to make sure that people have the resources. Again, utilize my office when it comes to getting a GED, utilize my office when it comes to getting housing, utilize our office when it comes to getting referrals for fatherhood programs, or even programs to help people go and get a job interview. I think, my background, what I learned as a kid is people perish for the lack of knowledge. And so part of this process is making sure young men have the proper information so they can make smart decisions, and more importantly, let them know that they feel that they are supported in this process. And so if I wasn't elected, I would still be organizing under the mantle of Peace Not Guns. When I'm in my own spare time, I'm always doing a level of outreach to young men and young ladies to make sure that they don't get involved in a life of crime and violence as well.
Of the three, you worked in the grassroots, state level, city level, which one do you think allows you to have the greatest impact directly on the problem?
I believe that all three levels can be effective in addressing the issue of gun violence. From a public policy standpoint, I'm a strong advocate of the report of lost and stolen guns, but also on a grassroots level, making sure people have the proper information and resources so they can make better choices goes a long way to preventing young men of getting involved in the life of crime and violence and even picking up a gun. And so I believe that, it doesn't take just one approach. I think it takes a variety of approaches, and more importantly, a comprehensive approach in addressing the issue of youth gun violence.
Now, when you were at the state, the city of Philadelphia tried to pass some gun legislation,
Yes.
and Harrisburg, because of the numbers,
Yes.
ended up overriding what Philadelphia tried to do. Now that
That's
you're at city
correct.
council, talk about some of the things that you're trying to do or that you hope to accomplish, and then some of the difficulties that are presented by the fact that you have to deal with Harrisburg possibly overriding what you do.
Well, the
here.
main difficulty is that we don't have the jurisdiction to create our own gun laws. And although we do put laws and we introduce ordinances, at the end of the day, the state has the jurisdiction to override our laws, so that makes it difficult. But we have to still advocate for common sense gun laws. We have to still put out there the issue and make known that as a city, we will not retreat on the issue of common sense gun laws. And so separate from that, I do a lot of work around making sure ex-offenders have support systems when they do return to our communities. And more importantly, going out, engaging in town hall meetings around the issue of youth gun violence, going into the schools and talking to young men and young women regarding the importance of education and not getting involved in a life of crime and violence. And so I believe that goes a long way. And more importantly, showing them the path that if they focus on their education, that they can follow their dreams and not get involved in a life of crime and violence. And I use myself as an example. Somebody took some time with me, my former mentor, the late Hardy Williams, took me under his wing, showed me the difference between living a life of crime and violence and focusing on politics and community organizing. And I think that's good for young people to hear that type of story.
There's been a lot of attention recently on creating gun legislation at the federal level, and some of that's leaked out to the various states because of what happened in Sandy Hook. Now that we have about the equivalent of a Sandy Hook every 3 to 4 weeks here in the city of Philadelphia, we're about in and around a murder a day for the last few years here in the city of Philadelphia. What do you think the difference is as far as there being attention now on guns, as opposed to this has been something that's been ongoing, particularly in cities like Philadelphia and Chicago?
Yes.
Why hasn't it gotten attention in the past? And do you think because of the new attention that there will be some movement forward on getting gun legislation passed?
Well, definitely because of what took place in Sandy Hook. And you're talking about children.
Right.
Children being murdered obviously put a spotlight on the issue of gun violence, not only in the city of Philadelphia, not only in the state of Pennsylvania, but also throughout America. And so as we move forward, one thing that President Barack Obama talked about, which is critical, is the people. The people have to aggressively advocate for common sense gun laws throughout this country. And the more people that step up and advocate, demand that we pass common sense gun laws, that's the only way it's going to be effective. And I believe as we move forward, you will see more attention on this issue of common sense gun laws throughout the country, whether it's assault weapons ban, whether it's universal background checks. All of those issues will be on the forefront as we move forward in the future. But one that I'm very, very strongly in support of is the report of lost and stolen guns. There are no gun factories in Point Breeze. There are no gun factories in Richard Islands. These young men do not walk into the gun stores and pick and buy or purchase 9mm or semi-assault weapons. They get these guns from somewhere. So I'm a strong advocate of going after those who sell guns.
When you talk about moving forward and getting these guns off the street, what are some of the things that you hear as far as resistance goes? You know, the NRA has been very aggressive in some of the things that they've put out in wanting to protect the Second Amendment. What has been some of the pushback that you've gotten when you've brought these subjects up?
Well, obviously the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says individuals have the right to bear arms, create a militia. And so that's part of the argument of why individuals do not want certain gun laws enacted. But for me, my approach is real simple. The report of lost and stolen guns. If a gun shows up in a homicide and a murder, you should be required to report that gun missing and or lost. I'll never retreat from the position that these young men in urban neighborhoods throughout America who are committing these murders and these homicides did not go into the store to purchase these guns. They're getting these guns from somewhere. And so a simple law is just requiring you to report if your gun was lost or stolen will go to the heart of the matter, which is basically cutting off the pipeline of people selling illegal guns in neighborhoods throughout cities throughout America.
To your point, a few years ago, there was a gun show in Valley Forge, which is there annually. There was a person there who went and bought about $150,000 worth of weapons, stopped at a diner when he left, and as he came out of the diner, he said that his car had been burglarized and all $150,000 worth of his weapons had been stolen. And that's the end of that story. People were concerned that that's an example of someone buying guns at a gun show, coming to a city, unloading their guns illegally, but then just simply saying that someone stole them. And that's the end of that. Are you hearing those kinds of stories, and are you concerned about the gun shows and how gun shows impact the flow of guns into cities?
Well, my main concern is going after those who sell these guns. And so if you're purchasing guns from gun shows and you're selling them on the street, then the federal law needs to get involved. State Attorney General's office needs to get involved, and our local law enforcement need to get involved and coordinate a strategy where you choke that pipeline. Because again, no gun factories made in Point Breeze. No gun factories are inside Richard Island. And so I'm always going after choking the pipeline. Because I know for a fact, these young men don't go into they're not going to the gun shows, just buying these guns. And a lot of these young men who are carrying these guns are juveniles, wind up in a homicide. And so for me, if you report 10, 20, 30 guns missing and or stolen, you should be held accountable as to, okay, just think about it. If you have a car and somebody steal your car and run someone else over, you're held accountable. It should be the same with something as deadly as a person who owns a gun.
There is some concern by folks who are supporters of the Second Amendment in full that this kind of legislation is going to lead to either registries in which they'll have to be accounted for by the government, or the folks will literally take their guns away and take their rights away. What do you say to folks who have those concerns about their Second Amendment rights being infringed upon in order to pass this gun legislation?
Well, actually, statistically, the NRA has data that says that majority of membership support certain common sense gun laws, such as universal background checks. For me, I don't think you're infringing upon a person's right if you're just asking them to report if their gun was lost or stolen. I think it's the reasonable thing to do. I think it's the responsible thing to do. And so, I mean, people are going to come up with all types of arguments and or opinions on the issue. But I believe that if you want to live in a society that's safe, simple common sense gun law, as universal background checks, the report of lost and stolen guns, and that has nothing to do with taking the gun away from you.
Now, also, not that long ago, there was an incident where men opened fire on a SEPTA bus. The mayor, in turn, made a public declaration and had some strong words. Did you agree with the mayor in his actions? And what do you think about when those kinds of violent actions happen out in the open like that? What do you think that says about our city?
Well, first and foremost, we have to make the issue of crime and gun violence our number one priority. I don't condone any acts of violence, specifically gun violence, because my number one priority is to make sure my constituents are safe. I have nieces, I have nephews, I have a grandmother going to and from home, and so I'm always going to make sure that safety is a priority in this process. I believe that we have to put more resources behind making sure that young men don't make stupid, boneheaded decisions, such as the young men who shot up the actual SEPTA bus. And so we want to focus on making sure that we start while they're young, give young people the resources to make positive decisions, so we don't end up in situations where people are picking guns over education. Young men are picking guns over employment. And I think collectively, as a society, we all have a stake to play in making sure that this city is safe.
Do you think that communities are doing enough themselves with folks interacting within the community to help make sure that this is the case? Or are you finding that sometimes the community is resistant to some of the efforts that you're making, either in the grassroots level or from a legislative level?
No, primarily when I go out and I'm doing community organizing, or someone gets murdered and we're doing a march or a prayer vigil, from the youngest person to a senior citizen, you all hear the same message. And that's the message that people want to live in communities that are safe. People want to live in communities that focus on peace and not guns. And so that's been my experience, whether I'm in Point Breeze or I'm in Eastwick. Matter of fact, just last week, I participated in a prayer vigil and a rally filled with all young people. And so at the end of the day, I believe everyone want to live in an environment that's safe and peaceful, but you're going to have some bad apples that's going to basically raise havoc on the community as a whole, and they should be dealt with accordingly.
Do you think the entire city takes this problem seriously? Or is it seen as that's a North Philadelphia problem, or that's a Southwest problem? Or do you think people say this is a Philadelphia problem, we need to take it on as a city?
I believe collectively it's a Philadelphia problem, and we all have a role to play. I mean, if you don't have a safe city, then business can't thrive. If you don't have a safe city, then people are going to opt out our educational system because no one wants to send their kids to an unsafe school. And so I believe collectively we all have to play a role in making sure that this city is safe, rather it's the issue of gun violence or the issue of bullying, and primarily focusing on the issue of anti-violence, as well as making sure that young people know how to resolve conflicts peacefully.
Now, the state has been cutting back some funding, particularly when it comes to schools. How difficult is it for you to do what you want to do legislatively in the city of Philadelphia when the state has taken away some of those funds?
I believe we have to always advocate for additional resources, but also let's look at what we have. It doesn't take a lot to organize people who want change in your community to go out to make sure you provide information to young men and young ladies so they can become productive members of society. So I'm from a generation that focused on becoming heroes and sheroes with less. people, a generation of people that didn't have the iPhone, didn't have the internet, but built leaders such as Charles Drew, Frederick Douglass, Fannie Lou Hamer, Shirley Chisholm. And so I believe in old school grassroots organizing. It doesn't take money to mentor a person. It doesn't take money to take the village mentality and the village approach that you're responsible for everyone within your own collective circle. And so that's always been my approach. So I didn't let the lack of resources stop me from mentoring a young person, having close to 5 or 6 interns inside my office. That doesn't cost anything to mentor someone, let them come down city council, look at the process of government, participate in our caucus hearings. And so for me, obviously we want more resources, but I don't use it as an excuse to not organize and mentor and inspire someone to stay on the right path.
You're relatively new to council. How have you found council when it comes to your legislation proposals? Have they been receptive largely? Have you encountered some resistance?
No, for the most part, the legislative agenda that I put forth, I've always been an advocate when it comes to the issue of youth gun violence. I've always been an advocate when it comes to making sure that all young people get a quality education. Always been an advocate when it comes to making sure that everyone has an opportunity to live in a decent home when it comes to the issue of affordable housing. And so thus far, I'm enjoying myself, and I've been well received.
That's good to know. In conclusion, anything going on that you would like us to know about? Anything that we haven't covered as far as gun violence or upcoming legislation that you'd like the folks to know about?
Well, obviously, the number one hot issue right now is making sure that we get AB undone right, make sure that people who will see an influx in their property taxes understand that in this process we are advocating to make sure that those assessments are fair and accurate. And more importantly, as we move forward as a city, we have to make sure that we keep the issue of youth gun violence on the forefront with resources, with outreach, and making sure that all young people have an opportunity to live productive lives.
For the folks who want to take advantage of the resources that your office has to offer, how can they reach out?
Yeah, I can be reached at 215-686-3412. On Instagram, Councilman KJ. On Twitter, Councilman KJ. And on Facebook at Councilman Kenyatta Johnson.
I want to know, how has technology changed how you do your job?
It always gives me an opportunity to stay in touch with my constituents from a social media standpoint, get my message out there on a regular basis. And so it's changing the face of politics, not only in this city, but also in this country as well.
Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on Inside Philadelphia City Council. I'm your host, Al Butler. See you around the hall.